Okay, folks, so let's start today's class. Good morning. Uh, okay, and just before we start, let me uh, request you, in case you see disruption, because my laptop is quite old; it's almost 6 years old, and in and also sometimes malfunctions. So, in case you find there is any issue, please call me because I have connected this laptop to my iPad and presenting through iPad. So, through serial cable. Sometimes there is a problem in this setup, but most of the time it works. All right, folks. So today we'll look at some of the great ideas in computer architecture, and these great ideas are proposed by they are in existence, of course, but these have been these ideas are clubbed together in Patterson's book, Hennessy and Patterson's book. So let's look at what are these great ideas, and then we will use these ideas throughout the course. Okay, may I request somebody, or I don't know who, to mute the mic? Uh, yeah, I think Devanshu and Harshit, please mute the mic, and maybe whoever else. Yeah, Harshit, yeah, thanks. All right. Okay, so we'll study evolution of computer architecture and then great ideas. These are two topics we will cover today. And I have taken this content largely from the book by Hennessy Patterson. And of course, slides I have borrowed from these two sources from Berkeley. Okay, so many of you won't be familiar with this diagram. This is how I started my computing journey. This actually is the computer as shown here is mainframe in 1950s and 60s, and it as I mentioned earlier, it occupies almost full building. Because in the beginning only vacuum tubes were used instead of transistors. Uh, it was very big computer, but great journey started from early 50s. And what you can see is a processor here is actually has less capability than what do you find it even in any embedded device today. Certainly million times less than what your mobile processor is. And these are different components, IO components. So IO components carried huge, I mean, it occupied huge space because we had magnetic tapes instead of hard disk, or kind of now we have a flash drive or SSD drive, right? So uh, these what you see here is a magnetic tape, and this kind of it stored huge amount of data, but it's all absolutely sequential. So it's all mechanical, and it takes a lot of time. And then we had, in fact, I when I started my when I wrote the first program, it was on rather than I had some terminal time, but apart from terminal time to input the program, we used punch cards or cards, right? And cards were just like a card with some holes into it, and these holes represented bit patterns, right? So you send this card deck. Each line corresponds to one card, each line of program, and then you feed this to card reader input, and then sequentially it will be read. So this was a time, right? And printer used to occupy again huge amount of space. So from there we moved to in 70s mini computers. Okay, and these were very expensive, and companies like Distal and HP were pioneer in designing such systems. And then 80s, we had this PC. I remember I bought my first PC, by spending my almost like 3 months salary, or rather 5 months salary. Uh, First time it was so expensive, And 94 I went to US for my postdoc. uh, and then whatever savings I have, I bought a laptop from that. So that was the cost of computer at that point in time. And now, of course, I mean, we have come to stage where processors are there everywhere, right? And most powerful processor possibly you have is on your high end mobile computers. Okay. And then from that we move into now, of course, we have handhold devices like PMD, what we call as, or mobile phone in general we call them. And then we have moved to cloud computing and warehouse scale computing, wherein you can see about 100,000 machines are put together to give you impression of very powerful virtual computing environment. From this environment you get lot of things, like when you do Google query, or all your queries are running in data center, that forms a cloud. Okay. Or for example, your Gmail, when you read Gmail is not your Gmail contents are not in one particular server, right? It's over a cloud in a data center, and so on, right? So we'll study what these warehouse house scale computers are, what is cloud computing, what is data center, towards the end of the course. So now we see that computers are everywhere. Okay. And each and every, even mechanical devices that we have are now coupled with a processor. Okay. You can see from mobile devices to self-driving car to drones, and everything has a computer built into it. Okay. So our class in okay, so what we see here is that general architecture or organization uh, of a computer. Okay. So on the top we have, we have application running, like I am running a browser and I am also running a Zoom here, Zoom application, right? Zoom application runs over some operating system. In my computer is a Mac OS. Okay. And then this OS runs over, so OS is actually a program. Okay. It's a compiled program, and it runs over instruction set architecture, right? It basically is written in C. When it's compiled, it becomes object language, a machine language, and that machine instruction, actually there's a one-to-one mapping between machine instruction and assembly instruction. You will see that later. And then that runs over hardware. Okay. So hardware is processor, memory, IO system. And then processor, how processor is actually designed, it has two parts: data path and control. Okay. And then below that we have circuit design, like for example, uh, within a CPU, or within a processor, this or within a data path, there are registers, there are and there are adders, subtractors, uh, and then different kind of other devices as. Okay. So we are not going to go into details of at this level or digital design level, because my assumption is that you would have studied that in previous course. Okay. So we'll start from there. I will assume that you know about headers. Of course, when we say data path, we'll look at them, how to arrange them. So we'll study in brief, but not in detail, right? And then below this we have logic gates. Okay. So like we have various kind of gates that we use: NAND gate, NOR gate, or something else, AND gate, OR gate, etc. So or whatever way we are developing, whatever IC technology is, we may be using some or maybe one of them, NAND or maybe NOR or something. So we are not going to go at that level. Okay. And below that, of course, these gates consist of transistors. Okay, you would have studied this in previous course. So so our focus of the course is here, whatever is shown in the diagram. Okay. We'll not look at compiler, we'll not look at assembler, you'll study it later. Operating system you will study later. And we'll look at primarily ISA, instruction set architecture. We'll look at processor design, memory, IO design, data path, and control. This is exactly what we'll cover in this course. Okay. Apart from that, of course, we will study some other concepts as we discussed earlier. For example, we will look at warehouse scale computing or multiprocessing and so on. Okay. All right. So this kind of shows evolution of a computer. For example, here at the top level, we'll see a warehouse scale computer, or there we can think of 10,000 or maybe 100,000 computers put together. Okay, we also call this as a data center. Okay, and nowadays, all big organizations have data centers, and they are also public data center where we can uh, take some computing resources. So, like for example, in Amazon, now if you want, we can take some computing resources, or from HP. So this warehouse scale computer has say close to 100,000 computers or processors. Okay, and then each processor here, like let's assume that we are showing here only one processor or one computer that consists of number of cores. It means that one computer today, even your laptop or your mobile, has multiple cores or multiple processors built into that. And there is of course cache memory corresponding to that shared between various cores, or uh, and then apart from cache memory there is a main memory, and there is a secondary storage. Okay, and of course input output devices, right, is shown here. Okay, and then this processor, each core in turn, uh, is shown here, have number of instruction units. I know what we show here is a pipeline of pipeline, that's in the data path. Or we can have very specialized functional units that can do some kind of vector processing, like here two vectors A and B are being added. Okay, so we can have a journal in pipeline, or very specialized pipeline. And then we have main memory, which is largely DRAM. Okay, and of course, I mean, below this is, if you go further down to each function unit, you will see that how we implement that functionality using logic gates. So this part will not go, we will remain at this level. Okay, all right. And on the other hand, when you go, what we what we discuss now on this side is hardware, this side is software. Okay, and when we go at this side, uh, see, now we have multiple cores available within a processor. Okay, and then thousands of these cores, the thousands of these processors are there. So there is an enormous amount of computing resources which can be exploited in parallel. Okay, so if you have 4 cores in the laptop, then if you have complicated tasks, say vector addition or graphics computation, then the work can be split into, or can be mapped into different cores, and these cores can execute the instruction or number of instructions. So there is a lot of scope for parallelism. Okay, now parallelism can start at the computer level itself. When you do Google query, for example, you query say bidden. Okay, and this query goes to thousands of computers, or that's attached to databases, and then results are collected, right? So that's a top level parallelism that can happen, because your simple one query can result into thousands of tasks. Okay, and results from then of course collected and presented to you. So that's top level. But there can be also your simple task in a processor or a computer that you can be split into multiple threads. Okay, So we'll look at what concept of threads little later. Once, of course, it will be taught in OS course, but we'll very briefly cover it in this course. Okay, once we study a little bit about processes and how processes, lightweight process become threads. We'll look at that later. And then we can also have parallel instructions, right? Uh, okay, and then we can use parallel data. One instruction can work on multiple data items. Okay, we'll look at these modes little later, like SIMD, MIMD kind. Uh, okay, so right now just understand that hardware, basic hardware remains the same. Okay, but when we can combine them, thousands of them or millions of them, to look like a very large warehouse computer. And then on the other hand, we have software, wherein now software is a task of software, how to exploit parallelism in the hardware. Okay, so there are number mechanism, as we said, we start with parallel requests, or then parallel threads, then parallel instructions, and then parallel data. All right, any question?
Sir, how is it decided like which functionality has been performed by which core? Like there are multi-core processors.
Okay, you will study that in OS course. So in
Okay.
general, there is scheduler. Okay, there are multi-threading programming, right? Where threads, how threads are mapped onto different processes is functionality of OS. Okay, however, in general, within a processor, there's a lot of parallelism that can be exploited by pipelining, and also multiple or vector processing. Okay, so we'll look at that when we reach towards the end of the course.
Okay, sir.
At this point in time, let's park this question, but surely remember to ask this question towards the end.
Sure, sir.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's move ahead. Uh, so now we looked at, so far we have looked at how computers evolved. Okay, it evolved from very simple mainframe computer, which was very heavy in the sense that it occupied whole building. And and since then, the transistor technology or VLSI technology has improved a lot, manufacturing process have improved a lot, and every year this density, every 2 years, the density of transistor in a chip were doubling, and that is the reason computers have become extremely powerful. Okay, and today we have come to the stage where almost like 100,000 computers can be put together in a data center, which has enormous amount of computing resources, and lot of parallelism is possible in that, right? So the parallelism in the task is exploited by this uh, this computing structure nowadays. Okay, whether it's a mobile uh, device or it's a data center. Okay, so now let's look at 6 great ideas in computer architecture, and we'll use these ideas often in our course. Okay, first idea is abstraction. Second is Moore's law. Okay, so Moore's law will today study in very brief, and next lecture will be detailed. One full lecture will spend on Moore's law, because this is very often asked questions in interviews, and also a lot of it has a lot of implication in overall computer design. Then third principle is principle of locality. Fourth principle is that of parallelism. Fifth principle is performance measurement and improvements. And sixth, uh, great idea is dependability or redundancy. So we'll look at each one of these in next, say, 30 minutes. Okay. First idea is abstraction or level of representation or interpretation. So what we see here is, if you go from bottom, at the bottom we have nothing but silicon. or then on top of that, or electrons, protons, neutrons, all this, at atomic level you can think is exactly same for, you know every device. And then on top of that, we have, from that we form transistors, and from transistors we have logic circuits. Okay, on top of logic circuits we have, you know architecture. We have different functions, some functional units we form, like adder, subtractor, registers, ALU, uh, memory, and so on, right? uh, so once you have those components available, you don't really see how they are designed and what is inside that, right? So each layer, if for example here, if we have say ALU or register file, then we really don't look, we only look at the functionality of that that's presented to higher layer, not really go down. Okay, and this all forms a microprocessor, and then we have a very clear interface here with which we say ISA. Okay, and then ISA is visible to anybody who does programming. So like RISC-V, uh, that's visible to programmers. And then we, on top of this assembly language program or assembly language, is high level language. Okay, like C program. So machine language, then assembly language, then C program. On top of that we have applications which uses this. Okay, so as a programmer today, okay, you don't have to know the structure of your computer. Okay, because abstraction is provided to you in terms of some OS things, and also OS interfaces, and also your assembly language, sorry, high level language program. If you know C, just code C and run it. What happens underneath is immaterial to you, right? Whether you may even not know what OS it uses, and you may also not know what is the processor that's running it, right? You may not know what is machine language, what is assembly language, and nothing is required. You only need to know some programming as a programmer. But if you ask your grandfather or your father who is not in or your mother who is not computer science student, so she will run WhatsApp, right? And she will also run browser. Okay, so that level, at, at that level, application level, it hides everything underneath it. She may even not know what is internet. She may not know, there is something called socket programming, or there is something called TCP/IP, you know uh, TCP/IP suite, internet suite is there. So nothing is required to know. Only at higher level, as we move up from logical circuit level to component level to machine instruction level to assembly level to high level language to program to applications, we hide the complexity. Okay, and that's the beauty, right? So that's the reason software engineering is extremely popular and main source of income for a country like India, because anybody can do programming. But if you ask most of the programmers to tell how much cache is used or what is memory hierarchy, they may not know, and it's not really required. Okay, similarly if you see the networking stack or networking TCP/IP stack, that's what we call, not okay. Then you will see that each layer hides the details of underneath layer, right? So if you are using HTTP, okay, you don't need to know that's using TCP or UDP or whatever, right? Okay, so this layer provides an abstraction, right? So you only need to know HTTP. The rest of things are taken care of by something that's inside, but you need not know. Suppose you are a network programmer, then you may want to use sockets and then may want to use TCP or UDP. Then you need to know only at this level how IP really works, No, you may not even need to know whether IPv4 or V6. You may not need to know what kind of routing is using, like OSPF, BGP, ISIS, or something like that. Okay, if you are doing programming at this level or working at this level, you need not know what is layer 2 technology, whether Ethernet or you know or Sonnet or something else. Okay, it's not really required. So uh, so at top level we see that we have only few things available, visible, right? And that the interface available. So that's all, that's enough for the task to be done. Because if everyone knows it, even if you are using TCP IP stack, and if you are asked to tell what everything's happening, then you will not be able to answer that, and most of the people will not be able to work. So that's the reason the designs in computer science in general are hierarchical in nature. It's kind of details of the lower parts are totally hidden away. Okay, it's not really necessary for anybody to know something at higher level. Okay, all right, and that simplifies the whole design. Okay, all right, any question on this great idea?
No, sir.
All right, okay. Second great idea.
Sir,
Yeah,
sir, you said, can you go back to previous slide?
yeah, this one.
Yes. So, yes, sir. So the assembler or the compiler, they themselves are the software.
Yes,
And how are they written? Like, compiler isn't written in the assembly language or what?
compiler is written in C language and then compiled. There's something called cross compilers. uh, okay, so anyway, so basically they ultimately these are whether see, yes, compilers are also like a basically these are object program. When you run something, is there one way is interpretation, right? Interpreters, which like Java we have interpreters. Second is um, when something is compiled, you have machine language instruction available. So the compiler that's available to you, okay, when you execute, compiler is a object language, or it is actually is a running, so it's a object code. Okay, how this compiler is designed, and then how basically most of part of the compiler is written in C language. Most of compilers are written in C language, and then they themselves are compiled to become object language. Okay, so that's the basic concept, right? But ultimately the one that's available to you is available in terms of object language. Good question. So what you can do as an exercise is to go to open source, okay, GNU open source, and look at the code of a compiler.
Okay, sir.
Okay, you will get the good idea about it. Okay, but ultimately see, because writing any software in assembly language is extremely hard. Extremely hard. So it's
I was thinking like when they were making C language, then how did they write compiler? Because C language was not made yet.
okay.
So,
Okay, so C language was not, yeah. So basically, they will write few instruction. See, also, see, compiler will run on a processor, right? It will generate object code for a processor, right? So they will write, initially they will write it in assembly language, right? Once
okay,
it's
sir.
available, then possibly what they can do is that they can one write rest of the compiler code in C, and then possibly using some other part of the compiler or some translator, they can convert into machine language.
Okay, sir.
All right, so yeah, That's what I think. Because compilers itself is a hugely complex program, so it's extremely difficult to write it in assembly language. So in the beginning, possibly yes, they would have been when language is not so complex, etc., possibly they would have written it in assembly language. Okay, all right. So okay, so second idea is about Moore's law. Okay, this we have already discussed in brief. Okay, so it's something like this. Because of improvement in manufacturing technology, IC manufacturing technology, number of transistors on a chip doubles every 18 to 24 months. Okay, why is it changing? Why is it doubling? Because the way we manufacture the ICs, the manufacturing process is or technology is improving. Okay, and that allows double number of transistors to pack in the same area. Okay, so it means that now this is kind of exponential growth. Okay, so if you look at this diagram from 1970s, almost till it's not very clear here, but almost like 2010 or so, there has been almost exponential growth. Okay, it means that if you buy, and that's the reason the laptops that I bought right in the beginning became obsolete in 2-3 years. Okay, so because more powerful laptop or computer is available at lower price in just 2 years down the lane, and this has been true almost for 50 years, from 1970 till uh, or even before 1970 till now. Okay, of course now we say that Moore's law is slowing down because it's not possible. Density of a chip is not doubling every 2 years, but maybe 3 years or so, and we are almost reaching towards the limit. Okay, now there is a huge impact of that. We are studying computer science largely because of this fact that computers have become cheap and very powerful, and we can use it anywhere, and the whole world is moving from analog to digital. Okay, that is the reason. Okay, all right. Any question on this part?
Sir, I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, is the Moore's law basically based on observation, or is there any particular logic behind it?
Oh, it's not observation. It's there. There has been measurements. I mean, every chip manufacturer or any processor manufacturer or any memory manufacturer gives all the data. How many transistors it has, how many uh, you know yeah, largely about the transistor it has packed in what in certain area. Okay, and there is a complete measurement. So see, uh, Gordon Moore, who was Intel founder, gave this assessment, or he says that this is in his observation or his thinking, this is how technology will move. Okay, and it happened in the very beginning. Okay, and since then this is true, because every device that is made from ICs, all this data is available, and this technology is improved largely because of manufacturing technologies, right? Okay, and of course, I mean, device technology and so on, the way devices are designed and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so this not based on some assumption, etc. So this, once this is it's treated as a law, then of course there are a number of organizations that uh, you know evaluate it in some sense, right? whether it is still exponential or not. Okay, so now we come to third grade idea.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes,
Are you talking about one core or a processor as a whole?
it doesn't matter. Wherever
Okay,
IC
sir.
it is,
So
wherever
second
IC,
is, are we considering mobile CPUs also?
everything, every IC I am talking about, I am talking about IC technology or chip
Okay, sir.
technology, semiconductor technology. It's also true for memory.
Okay, sir. And sir, one more that as TSMC is also working on 3 nanometer technology
Yes.
today. So they have achieved 3 nanometer, but not industrially. So will it be counted?
That I don't know. maybe when they see technology. See, when we say technology is moving ahead, of course there is one commercial part and second is research part. Research is always ahead of commercial thing, right? So once, of course, Apple has come out with 5 nanometer technology very recently, and then I am sure there people are working for 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer, and so on. Right? I don't know whether that those measurements are. See, this is in general a law, and when we say it's slowing down, it essentially means that uh, you know progress will be there, but it may not be as fast as it has been happening because there is a component of time, right? We say every 2 years is 18 to 24 months, 18. So there is a possibility that it may take more time. Actually, it's taking more time. So how much more time, that people do not know, and there must be some way for people to find out. Generally they use commercial chips available. All right. Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, sir, is it possible that the transistor number per chip become almost constant after a particular year, like
So
after 2080,
yeah,
etc.?
so people say that by 2030, say 10 years from now, or
Yes, sir.
we will not be able to go in, or we will not be able to increase the density of a chip. Okay, so we will not be able to pack because it will reach almost like atomic level, almost at the atomic level. And one reason, as we are going closer and closer, is that the leakage current is increasing. Once leakage current increases, then there is a lot of heat. We'll look at these reasons in the next class. Okay. All right. We next class we'll discuss why, what will happen next. Okay, when maybe after a few years, in what has already started happening. And one result of that is that we have multi-core processors, right? I mean, we cannot put too many transistors in general in a small area. So what we create is that we can create multiple processors separately, such that we can optimize heat generation and many other factors. Okay. Any more question? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, but the number of transistors is depend only on the design or something like that anyone can find. So,
Yes.
sir, how can we limit that or predict that anyone would get the design only after 18 or 24 months?
So this is basically okay. Nobody can predict. So see, essentially, Mr. Gordon Moore has, because he was CEO of Intel and he was a researcher by himself, so he's observed this and then postulated it will happen like this in his understanding, and then it's true. It has been true, and people have been measuring that. Okay, that was his greatness. That's the reason this thing is called Moore's law. Okay, so I may postulate something, but it may not come true, right? And nobody is going to. He was an important person, postulated, and then people believe. Okay, and then technology has progressed exactly that way. Okay, at the same pace. That's the reason is a very powerful thing, because you know and it's a lot of implication on us, right? For example, whatever program somebody has written, some program I had written say 20 years back, and that time I ran it on say big mainframe, and today same thing, if I run it on my laptop, it runs at 10,000 times faster. Okay.
Yes.
So the great thing is that this law has remained true. Okay? All right. So next thing is that, let's look at a computer, and then there are various components into it, right? So we have CPU, then we have registers, okay, below, and registers contains temporary data, and then we have cache memory, okay, then we have main memory, then we have disk, hard disk, and then we have tape. Now if you look at how much access time they have, you will see that access time for register is 1 nanosecond. Okay, then on chip cache has 2 nanosecond, and then cache is a kind of memory we'll study in detail. Then onboard cache has 10 nanosecond. Then main memory, which is DRAM, is 100 nanosecond. And then of course there can be something in between also. Now we have SSD, it's not shown here, but then disk, which is hard disk, which has mechanical moving parts, is 10⁶ nanosecond. And then we have tape drives, which is 10⁹ nanosecond, right? You look at the time. So when we have to get a data from, say, disk to CPU, CPU is below here, we get to use as registers. Look at the 10⁶ is how much? 1 million. So you can say that registers are 1 million times faster than disk. So if you have a program that's sitting in a disk, or your instruction, your CPU runs at certain clock cycle, which is almost same clocks. One clock cycle is, say, 1 nanosecond, let's assume, right? So it has to wait for 1 million clock cycles for get the data from hard disk. And same thing, if you look at, if you can't visualize this, then you can visualize, how much time I will take to move my head, or so for example, from my head is a reference point. From there, I go to end of the room in my classroom. Okay, it may take 1 minute, for example, and then I, from my lecture hall, if I go to your hostel, it may take, say, 10 minutes. Then from there, I go to Palolem Beach, it may take 1.5 hours, assuming my some speed. And from there, if I go to Pluto at same speed or slightly higher speed, it will take 2 years. And then I go to a galaxy, Andromeda, it may take 2000 years. So that is between, now the ratio between these two is same as the ratio between getting data from tape drive to CPU. Okay, so and we cannot keep everything in registers because a temporary thing. We cannot keep in cache because cache is very limited, small in size and very fast. We cannot keep everything in main memory because volatile, and the capacity is not as much as that of a hard disk. So we'll have to keep the data, of course, in hard disk, of course in tape drive, and get the data to CPU, and then access time is hugely different. Then how do you manage it? So that gives the idea of principle of locality or memory hierarchy. Okay, so basically what we do is that CPU is the fastest at the top, it's a super fast. Then we have registers which also work almost at the speed of processor, they are very fast. Then we have CPU cache, this is, and then we have L1, L2, L3 caches, the various level of caches. As we go down, the capacity increases. Okay, capacity increases, but access time decreases. Access time also increases, right? So as you move up, the access time reduces, it may time to read reduces. And further down, we have, we have solid state memory or SSD drive. Okay, and then we have, hard disk. mechanical drive, right? So here we can contain lot of data at this level, but access time is huge. Okay, so what we do is that we keep moving data up. Okay, whatever we need, like I'm running a program, I will keep that part in main memory. Okay, so if I am not able to keep everything in memory, then part of that will surely be in SSD. Okay, and then my program is running, and it's running only a part of the program is running. Say I am into, say, for loop, then that instructions and corresponding some data I will keep large in the cache memory. So basically I am using the principle of locality. Whatever I am executing, I will try to bring it to the highest level. Those instructions will be highest level such that my access time is reduced. And sometimes I may not be able to because there will be a miss, then I will bring it from lower level. And each miss gives me a penalty. Now I am going to fine tune the performance of the whole system in such a way that my access time is minimum while I have infinite capacity available. Okay, well, this is called memory hierarchy or principle of locality. We will spend almost like 3-4 lectures or maybe 5 lectures in this one. Okay, another 10 minutes, let's finish another 3 ideas. So next, okay, any question on this one? You understood
No,
it?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so in your laptop, try to see the configuration of laptop. Okay, this exercise that you need to do. We look at how much cache memory it has, what are different level of caches. It surely it will have L1 cache, L2 cache, and L3, 3 levels of caches. Then some of you may have laptop that has SSD, like my laptop has a SSD drive. Then many of the laptops will also have a hard disk drive. Okay, and no laptop will have a tape drive nowadays, right? So please try to look the configuration of your laptop so you'll understand some concepts. Okay, and the next great idea is parallelism. So parallelism so the number of ways the parallelism can be exploited, and some simplest way is that of a pipeline. Okay, we will study pipelining in great detail, but in general it is every instruction we need to fetch from memory, we need to decode, then we need to execute, and then as a result of execution there's some result which we need to save it either temporarily into register or main memory, right? So these are the 5 stages in general. Okay, if we execute one instruction at a time, then second instruction after that, and so on, we may be wasting a lot of time. So what we can do is that while first instruction is in, say, execution, say decode state, second instruction can be in the fetch state, and so on, right? So we can create a pipeline like this. At time 1, instruction 1 is being fetched. At time 2, what we are doing is first instruction. Okay, this is a slightly different diagram. So instruction when 1 instruction, okay, so first is fine. The first instruction, first we are going to fetch the instruction from memory, and at this time slot. Second time slot we are fetching the operands. With instruction there are operands on which it can operate. Third is third time slot we are executing them. Fourth time slot we are storing the results. Okay, and then while now we see that instruction at time 2, while first instruction in second stage, the first instruction is in the first stage, the fetch is happening. So in this way we can parallelly execute multiple instructions. Now as simple as that, right? In order to visualize what's happening, if you go to marriages, there is a buffet system, right? There might be 5 people standing there serving you dishes, right? Now if we have simple model where until suppose you are the first in the queue, and then 5 people will give one by one. If you have a rule that second person cannot enter while until you finish your plate, okay, then that's not efficient. So what happens in practice is that once you have been served first thing, say for example dal, you move to the second person, right, who will serve you rice, while the person behind you will get dal. Okay, so you are went to towards the end of that, there are 4 people behind you, so everyone is busy, all units, all the people who are serving are busy at the same time. Everything is happening in pipelined way, right? This is how industry also works. When you make motors, different, there are assembly line, there are pipeline. Okay, that's the first way. Second way is that we have look at the instruction, and within instruction there are multiple things can you do them parallelly. Okay, and then get the result, like one instruction you do parallel things, parallel threads or something, and then the result you combine and get the result. So the second way of parallelism. Third way is that the task itself can be split into number of tasks and can be done parallelly. This is at the top level, right? Say for example, parallelism analogy is, if I ask you to peel 100 potatoes, okay, one thing is that I want to, and I want you to do it fast. So one thing is that you may try to learn doing things fast. The second thing is that you get 99 friends and ask them to peel. Okay, so now you can finish in one time, times the slot, right? So parallelism can be done in multiple ways. Pipelining is on one hand, and then total parallel execution is on the other hand. Okay. Okay. All right. But how much fast you can do things given a task totally depends on what can be parallelized and what cannot be parallelized. Okay, if you have a task and most
Hello,
of
sir.
the, yeah, tell me.
Is it the parallel execute at a time something else?
Yeah, I couldn't understand. Can you please repeat?
Hello. I wanted that is it the parallelism needs to execute more than one code at a or
Okay, so it could be number of instructions that can be executed parallelly, or it could also be depends on how you are exploiting parallelism and what kind of parallelism is available in your problem. Okay, it could be at, if there is no parallelism available at all, then you can do pipelining. Okay, if parallelism is available, then you can have multiple instructions parallelly being executing. Third is that you can have multiple of these pipelines also. See, you assumed when you go to a wedding ceremony there is only one line or one, so you can have multiple such queues also, right, in pipeline fashion. So it totally depends on your how much parallelism you have in the problem and how much parallelism can be exploited in the system. Okay, we'll look at some of these.
sir, but
Yeah,
sir, but in the CPU, once we if you try to simultaneously execute more than one program, then it will one and then go for another code. But in GPU, they can add it. So parallelism and in CPU.
Okay, I'm not able to hear you correctly, clearly, because I think there is some echo. But what I want to say is that okay, you'll have to look at there are multiple ways parallelism can be exploited. Just keep this thing in mind. Okay, at the top level, as we see in data centers, there's huge amount of parallelism available that can be exploited. Okay, wherein at the processor level there are multiple cores. If you have multiple threads, then these threads can run parallelly. But can you create a thread of your from your problem, it totally depends on your problem structure, right, statement. Okay. Third thing is that within a thread, you can use a single pipeline. Okay. So what we have discussed is just very few things. Okay. Now there is also possibility that you can run multiple instruction out of order. This in program logic, you need to run one first instruction before the second instruction. But if the second instruction is not dependent on first instruction, you can run the second instruction before first instruction or in parallel. So there are hundreds of ways in which parallelism can be exploited. We'll look at some of them in this course. Okay, not all of them. All right. Okay. So just hold on to your question and then you can send it to me because I'm not able to hear you out properly. Maybe I can offline I can answer you this one. Okay, so the something that I was discussing is Amdahl's law. Okay, Amdahl's law says that make common case fast and don't waste resources on components that has little impact on overall performance. So if you have a task and most of the task is sequential in nature, okay, and then part of the task can be split into multiple subtasks and can be executed in parallel. So so all you can parallelize is this part. Okay, so it means that total effectiveness of parallelism is dependent on what can be parallelized. So you can say that performance improvement through an enhancement is limited by fraction of time enhancements come into play. It means that if this part, which is absolutely sequential, is 90% of part and this part is only 10%, okay, and you parallelize it, and you take 1 unit of time for execution and this takes 90 unit of time. So instead of 100 units of time, what you are going to do is in 91 units of time. Okay, so you will have to see what can be parallelized. If the problem is inherently sequential, then nothing much can be done whatever the computer is. Okay, a simple example you can think of is, if you have suddenly invited 10 friends to your home and ask your mother to make something, she will always think in terms of what can be made quickly on multiple gas burners. Okay, uh, rather than she will never think of making something that's absolutely sequential. For example, dosa. If you start making dosa, then you will have to, there's a huge process of soaking dal into water for some hours and then ferment it, paste it, ferment it. Only then it can be parallelizable. Last part, even if you have 10 stoves, you can make parallelly 10 dosas. But the 90% task is sequential. So she will, based on her logic, she will never start doing this. She will make something that can be done immediately. Okay. All right. So please go through this. I'm not going to discuss another. Okay. And idea number 5 is performance measurement and improvements, right? So the number of ways to improve performance. Locality we have studied, parallelism is another. We can create very specialized hardware for vector processing and many other things, matrix multiplication, that's way. And then we have to do continuous measurement of performance and then improve the performance by measurements, right? So this the next idea. And the last idea I will finish in 1 minute is dependency of redundancy. Okay, so Apple chip that has come out recently has more than 1 billion transistors. Do you think that all billion transistors inside it will work all the time? Surely not. They will fail. In your laptop also there are a large number of transistors that are not working because there is always a lifetime. There's something concept called reliability. Okay, reliability is probability that device will function properly, okay, with no failures. But our laptop is working. Okay, it means that we are going to use concept of availability. How things will remain available despite some components failing, right? So suppose these are the 3 components, so we want to use only 2 of 3. So we can get output from 3 and something fails, we can discard that and then get the result. Okay, so if we have redundant system, then we can exploit this redundancy to create more availability. Best example is your human system, right? I mean, our body, right? We have 2 eyes, but if one eye goes off, then still I can work with performance degradation. Okay, and something that is not redundant has to be very reliable, and that's true also in computer system. The parts that are not redundant has to be very reliable, otherwise system will fail continuously. See, for example, in our body, heart is extremely reliable component that goes on for almost 100 years until you don't abuse it. Okay, so similarly in the system, fortunately we have transistors, or because of Moore's law, available in abundance, so we can effectively create memory system and components that that are allowed to fail. It means that if there is a failure, then we can recover from that. And this concept we can see in data centers, right? Because we create VMs, and if processor fails, we simply move VM to different computer. All right, so this is, and this slide says that this concept is applied everywhere in data center. For example, if one computer fails, we move to the other computer, or one VM to another VM. Similarly, we have disk, multiple parallel disks are there, we call it RAID, and one disk fails, then we can get data from the second disk, which is of course duplicated, and so on. Within memory also we use the same concept of error correcting code, etc. All right, so that's all for today. Lecture summary: we have looked at evolution of computers. We have also looked at 6 great ideas: abstraction, Moore's law, principle of locality, parallelism. We can improve performance by measurement, and redundancy, dependability through redundancy. All right, okay, thank you. See you in the next class, that is on Monday. All right, Tuesday. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Sir, I have a question regarding RAID system.
Yes.
Sir, why do we opt RAID? Because as you are saying that we have copy of data.
Yes.
So what is the significance if we are copying the same data over 6 to 10 drives?
Okay. Okay. So it's something like this. Okay, remaining people can of course log off. Okay, so how? Suppose I have no RAID, and if I lose some data, what will happen?
Yeah. Sir, drive may fail and I may lose data.
Yes. So I don't want to lose data, bhaiya.
Sir, I can make just two na, that one I will use and I will copy to the second. So,
No. So
but
what happens, because these failures will happen suddenly, you will not come to know when something is failed. Okay, but still you want data. So your Gmail, for example, right?
yeah,
Gmail data is so the way it is configured is that your data is at least in 3 places.
at least in 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
at least in 3, in my opinion, right? Or multiple places. And if one server where your data is fails, it picks up from other place. Okay, otherwise you will sue them if your data goes, and then this are going to fail. These are mechanical devices.
Yes,
It has
yes.
limited lifetime, and these failures can happen at any point in time. There is no, of course, I mean, there is always some kind of guarantee that it will not fail, but machines can fail.
Yeah. So I was watching a video where Linus Tech Tips video. So sir, they configured the RAID system. So I was very curious about, but sir, they only lost about 10% of their capacity.
10%
Of their capacity, like they installed a petabyte of drives, and they were able to use like 790 to 780 gigs TVs.
Okay. Okay, totally depends on design. Totally depends on how RAID system is designed. What is level of duplication? Whether it's just simple duplication or maybe 4 out of 3 or something, right? I mean, any 3 works out of 4
Okay,
is not the same as any 4 works out of 5. So it totally depends on the design of RAID system. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Totally RAIDs comes in various flavors also, right? And various companies are designing different way. On top, it should not be visible to user how it's happening. That's the beauty.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
Hello.
Yeah.
I have a doubt in regarding parallelism. As you said that there are two instructions that are independent to each other, then we can run it as a parallel. So how did it get to know that they are independent on each other? Means
We can. Okay, so there is something called data dependency analysis. Okay, and it can be done compile time. The compiler will come to know whether these two instructions are. See, first thing is compiler is in general generating a code.
okay.
Okay, and at that level, it can find out whether it is second instruction is related to first instruction or not, or it can generate data in certain way that certain instructions, second instruction or third instruction is not dependent on first instruction. Okay, so there are multiple ways of again finding out, and when we study pipeline,
Yes, sir.
okay, then we'll look at this concept that how can we find out there's a data dependency, because if you are running the instruction into different pipelines, then you have to find out parallelism between, dependency between instructions. Okay. So we look at the, so to answer your question, at the compile time it can be done. Also, it can be done at execution time, depending on what is your
So method you are using.
yeah, what method or what is the hardware inside.
Okay, sir.
Largely, it is done at the compilation time of compilation.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.